Mine has been a life of much shame. I can't even guess myself what it must be to live the life of a human being. I was born in a village in the Northeast, and it wasn't until I was quite big that I saw my first train. I climbed up and down the station bridge, quite unaware that its function was to permit people to cross from one track to another. I was convinced that the bridge had been provided to lend an exotic touch and to make the station premises a place of pleasant diversity, like some foreign playground. I remained under this delusion for quite a long time, and it was for me a very refined amusement indeed to climb up and down the bridge. I thought it was one of the most elegant services provided by the railways. When later I discovered that the bridge was nothing more than a utilitarian device, I lost all interest in it. Thus begins the first notebook section of No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This is the second of a 9-part series here on the channel. On this channel, I speak about literature and only about literature. So if you find yourself here by chance, but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more series like this. There is also poetry and short stories as well as writers' quotes often on this channel. Now, there is also a link to my personal channel to be found in the description below, where you can find me talking about literature, about nonfiction, about philosophy, about movies, all those sorts of things in the description below. So, there is going to be a lit crit portion of this video. There will be a writer's corner portion of this video. There will be a best quote and a section on application. How do we apply literature in real life? All of that in this video. So if you like this sort of thing, it does me a lot of good if you hit that like button in order that YouTube knows to share this video with other literature lovers. Now, let's get into it. So, what happened? Our protagonist lives in shame and satiation. Never hungry, that guy. Never much of anything, really, especially not a human being. He feels himself more and more distant from people and increasingly afraid to be found out. Before figuring, as long as I can make them laugh, it doesn't matter how, I'll be all right. If I succeed in that, the human beings probably won't mind too much if I remain outside their lives. Yozo tells a story of his father, who took regular business trips and always returned with gifts for the children, gathering them all around before one of his trips and asking everyone what they want. But when Yozo himself is prompted, he doesn't have an answer. His father suggests a lion mask, but Yozo's brother says a book would be best. His father becomes disappointed, and late that night, Yozo sneaks out of bed and finds his father's notebook and writes lion mask next to his name on the list. His father was happy to buy the mask, but was vocal in wishing Yozo had been more up front. So what do we have going on here in this, the first notebook, titled First Notebook of the novel here? This is where we get into narration from Yozo. We have his thoughts on things. And I want to start a little bit on 22, which tells us something about the character himself. We get this quote here. When later I discovered that the bridge was nothing more than a utilitarian device, I lost all interest in it. Again, when as a child I saw a photograph of subway trains in picture books, it never occurred to me that they had been invented out of practical necessity. I could only suppose that riding underground instead of on the surface must be a novel and delightful pastime. So there's two things sort of to talk about here. One, yeah, no, of course, that's what kids would think. Of course, a child feels that way. A child doesn't have to go to work. A child doesn't have to go cross the country to meet his family. A child doesn't have to do any of those things. Doesn't have to worry about responsibility. Of course, a child feels this way. The strange thing here is taking it with you into adulthood. The strange thing here is not learning from the situation that, oh, okay, I was simply wrong. The strange thing here is that the lesson was not internalized. Instead, it was sort of externalized. And we're going to get this a few more times with this character, even just in this chapter, where the sort of problem for our character seems to be that he believes he is the weird one. And in a meta sort of nature, it is especially troubling for people like us who are engaging with the book, because we understand that the big thing about literature, the main importance of literature, is that we're all the same. And reading these stories from different people saves us from making the same mistakes as other people, might guide us towards the good things that other people do. Um, So the fact that he doesn't learn that lesson from this, but instead decides that he is too strange to be a normal person, is something that is going to be foundational for this character. Also, the realization of these things changing his view on them. He was so wrapped up in the fact that maybe these things were simply for play. It tells us a little bit that this character going forward might be one of these space cadets among us, right? You know what I'm talking about. A dreamer who is mashed down in a world of usefulness. The utilitarian nature of arguments here is what kills the fun for him. Another thing that we can take away from this little snippet here, always with the photographs. Always with the photographs. The prologue here, we had 3 photographs of the man, right? Not memories of the man, photographs of the man. We are here having photographs of, whenever I saw photographs of subway trains in picture books, photographs, 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 photographs. A strange quirk for this narrator, and really sort of meta because of the fact that he does not feel he is a person. That is separation from peoplehood, right? From personhood. The same way that viewing a photograph of a thing is separate from the thing itself. It is 2 degrees removed from everything. And then moving forward, still on 22, there we go. I had not the remotest idea of the nature of sensation of hunger. It sounds peculiar to say it, but I have never been aware that my stomach was empty. One of the things that it is possible to take away from this quote in the literary sense is that our character is never hungry. Our character is never motivated. Hunger being the primary motivational factor that nature gives us to move. If you're hungry, you got to go eat. Well, prior to supermarkets at al, we had to go hunt. We had to go pick the berries. We had to go find the mushrooms and extract them. All of these sorts of things. So, again, this is a small thing, but the very lack of motivation removes the narrator a little further from personhood, a little further from nature. Constantly moving further from nature here. Now, I have a long quote here and then a follow up from page 27. So we get this. Am I wrong from 25 and 26? Am I wrong in thinking that these people have become such complete egoists and are so convinced of the normality of their way of life that they have never once doubted themselves? Ironic from this narrator. If that is the case, their sufferings should be easy to bear. They are the common lot of human beings and perhaps the best one can hope for. I don't know. If you've slept soundly at night, the morning is exhilarating, I suppose. What kind of dreams do they have? What do they think about when they walk along the street? Money? Hardly. It couldn't only be that. I seem to have heard the theory advanced that human beings live in order to eat, but I've never heard anyone say that they lived in order to make money. No. And yet, in some instances, no, I don't even know that. The more I think of it, the less I understand. All I feel are the assaults of apprehension and terror at the thought that I am the only one who is entirely unlike the rest. It is almost impossible for me to converse with other people. What should I talk about? How should I say it? I don't know. This was how I happened to invent my clowning. So Yozo is talking about the fact that he's so sort of uncomfortable with everything here and always has been. And that is how he decides to schism himself, create a chasm in his own character. Oh, I kind of like that phrasing. And upon creating that chasm, he puts on the mask of the clown to show the world. Putting on the mask of the clown to show the world, he always has to put some input in there because that's what the clown does. But then it is no longer asked anything of him, which in which case he gives us a quote. As long as I can make them laugh, it doesn't matter how, I'll be all right. If I succeed in that, the human beings probably won't mind too much if I remain outside their lives. The one thing I must avoid is becoming offensive in their eyes. I shall be nothing. The wind, the sky. He's doing that because, wrong thing here. He has to invent the clowning. He has to invent the clowning because he doesn't understand how these normal people work. He does not internalize that everyone is sort of the same, that these are things that you come to be about, not that you just are born doing. The chase for money, for example, things like that. And creating the clown about himself gives him the ability to be invisible. Creating the clown about himself gives him the opportunity to keep living the internal life that he wants to live. Then we get this. As a child, I had absolutely no notion of what others, even members of my own family, might be suffering or what they were thinking. I was aware only of my own unspeakable fears and embarrassments. Before anyone realized it, I had become an accomplished clown, a child who never spoke a single truthful word. So in that split of the personality from the exterior and the interior, that chasm there that was caused by our character feeling so distant, we have to ask some questions. Now, I have here the APA Dictionary of Psychology, antisocial personality disorder. Now, of course, not diagnosing anyone, but this is what we get to do when we are talking about literature. We get to bring up conversations around a point. So, antisocial personality disorder by APA Dictionary of Psychology is defined thusly: The presence of a chronic and pervasive disposition to disregard and violate the rights of others. Manifestations include repeated violations of the law, exploitation of others, deceitfulness, impulsivity, aggressiveness, reckless disregard for the safety of the self and others, and irresponsibility, accompanied by lack of guilt, remorse, and empathy. The disorder has been known by various names, including dissocial personality, psychopathic personality, and sociopathic personality. Now, I brought this up because um, I had absolutely no notion of what others, even my family members, might be suffering or what they were thinking. So, this is, oh, right. It is among the most heavily researched of the personality disorders and is the most difficult to treat. It is included in both the DSM 4 TR and DSM 5. So it seems to me the okay, I'll just go for this. The differences between psychopath and sociopath. This comes to us from simplypsychology.org. Psychopaths lack of guilt, remorse, empathy. Sociopath, lack of remorse, but guilt and empathy may be present in some cases. Psychopath, pretending to feel emotions. Sociopath, some emotions are felt, rage, but are shallow and fleeting. So, what do we have here so far with Yozo? Yozo pretends to have emotions with the funniness. He pretends to be funny because funny is accepted by other people. Psychopath, inability to form true emotional attachments. Sociopath may form close attachments to one or few individuals. So that's something we can look forward to in the rest of the story. Psychopaths tend to be successful. Sociopaths, consistent irresponsibility, repeated violations of the law. Now, one of the reasons that psychopaths are more successful than psychopaths will play a game. Psychopaths will say, okay, well, I do like money because I get to spend it on whatever I want. How do I get money? Well, I have a boss. All I have to do is lie to my boss and present myself as better. Psychopaths learn what other people want and they give it to them. They give it to them. And they're very good at it. That is what makes a psycho. That's why the psychopath is in a suit here. The sociopath is not. Psychopaths are good at playing the game. American Psycho, very successful individual in that book. Psychopaths, dishonesty. Sociopaths, constant lying and deception. Okay, so the same there. We get to, not the same, but we get to interpret that a little bit as we go forward in the story. Psychopath, manipulative behavior, narcissism, and superficial charm. Sociopath, aggressive and reckless behavior. Which one sounds like what Yozo is doing? Is he manipulating? Is he being narcissistic, believing that he must be the one that is correct? Is he having superficial charm when he is making others laugh? Are we not reading No Longer Human and simply reading not American Psycho, but Japanese Psycho? Is that what we're doing here? Is that the story that we find ourselves in? 28 and 29, we get this quote. As long as I make them laugh, it doesn't matter how, I'll be all right. If I succeed in that, the human beings probably won't mind it too much if I remain outside their lives. The one thing I must avoid is becoming offensive in their eyes. I shall be nothing, the wind, the sky. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about with the lit crit portion of this video, what is it that our father suggests Yozo might want? He might want a mask. He might want the mask of a lion. Lions are brave. It's a symbol for bravery. Lions are bold. They are strong. They are voracious. Lions are always hungry. Lions are always hungry. Yozo does not agree that he wants the lion mask. Dads want to believe their sons are lions. Yozo is not. So his brother suggests, well, get him a book. That's what the guy wants. Yozo is so humiliated by this in his father's disappointment that he sneaks back into that notebook in which his father was taking notes and writes down, no, get me a lion mask. Well, that's awfully strange because his father wants him to be a lion. Instead, Yozo decides to get the mask of a lion, the mask of a lion that you can show the world while you are something else behind it. That is what we are getting so far, I think, in this chapter. Now let's talk some craft. Some of the writing involved here, and what can we take from the first notebook as far as what it means to be a writer? Well, I have here from masterclass.com a little bit about characterization, and then we're going to go to grammarly.com for the part of characterization that is missed here. What is characterization? Characterization is the description of a character's physical traits, how a character looks, point of view, personality, private thoughts, and actions. There are two types of characterization in fiction writing: indirect characterization and direct characterization. Both indirect characterization and direct characterization work together to create a complete picture of your character for the reader. Remember that characters, like people, are imperfect. They don't need to be likable, but they must be interesting. What is indirect characterization? Indirect characterization is the process of describing a character through that character's thoughts, actions, speech, and dialogue. An author will use this type of characterization to guide the reader in making their own conclusions about our character. Examples of indirect characterization in literature. This comes to us from Anne in Anne of Green Gables by L. M. Montgomery. My life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes. Here, Montgomery has created a character who has a complex and active imagination, is extremely curious and awestruck by the world around her, and who also has a very dark past with residual emotional trauma coming to the forefront. And we can't get all of that, but we can get a good idea about all of that from the phrase, my life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes. Now, the darkness, the residual trauma, why would someone use graveyard of buried hopes? This comes to us from Grammarly.com, a definition of direct characterization. Direct characterization is when an author describes a character in a straightforward manner as if telling the reader directly, also known as explicit characterization. Direct characterization involves specific details about a character's appearance, motivation, job, passions, and or background, but inhibits the reader from drawing their own conclusions about the character. A powerful weapon in any writer's arsenal, direct characterization can enhance any story, but also hinder it if not handled properly. In this guy, I didn't mean to get all that in there, but the important thing here is to talk about characterization with Yozo. What can we learn about this character so far in this text, and what are the ways that we have done so? Now, we have an interesting sort of dichotomy here because the characterization is being given to us through a first person narrator. Do we believe Yozo or not? Do we believe our character when he tells us these things? Do we believe our character when he tells us that he does not feel like other people, that he does not consider himself a human being? If we don't believe him, that in itself is characterization. Now, with the question of literature, for me, it comes back to the question of art. For me, the definition of art is that which is interpreted. That's what separates it from propaganda. Propaganda is not to be interpreted. Propaganda is to be taken exactly as it was meant to be. Now, of course, we can interpret it, and that's why it falls apart. But literature, art, is that which is to be interpreted, that which is interpreted. Leaving up to interpretation our character is what makes a story like this compelling. But we are given a character who seems to be cowardly, aren't we? A character who runs away from confrontation, a character who is running away from responsibility, a character who is running away from those things he might enjoy, those things he might learn to value. He is intending to value nothing. Why? Why is that? We don't have that yet. We don't have the reason why yet in this story. But the characterization that we do have comes from our character's own mouth. That's powerful. We can choose to believe it or not. That choice, being artistic as it is, allows separate readings of this text. Maybe our character is being very honest. Our character does feel this great connect. Our character is not trying to be different, simply is different, mechanically different. Our character is something else entirely. If we assume that to be true, the characterization here is much different. The characterization here lends itself more towards that psychopath, sociopath sort of route. If our character is lying to us, well, maybe it falls into the same thing, right? Because if our character is lying to us, he's trying to pull one over our eyes, just like all of those people in his regular life, with the funny business. And when we are writers, we have to understand that the characterization that we put into especially our main character is going to drive the rest of the story. Our character here has been Yozo has been characterized in that first bit, the prologue, as something scary. Remember those three successive photographs of Yozo? Those three successive photographs of Yozo led to a scarier and scarier place. Here, the characterization of Yozo from Yozo's mouth is that he was a jokester. We now have conflicting characterization for Yozo. That builds in the reader intrigue. How can we be told this in the prologue and this in the first notebook? We can be told in the prologue that this is a character getting ever more scary. In the first notebook, we have a character speaking to us for himself that is presumably after all of those pictures that we had in the first prologue, in the prologue there. So it is very important with characterization to build things up front. You build the character up front. Think of establishing shots in movies. It's the easiest way to think about it. In The Dark Knight, the very first thing we have is a bank heist with the Joker. The Joker has told all of these other characters to kill another member of the heist team. That tells us something about the Joker. The Joker is spoken about by those other characters in a negative fashion, insinuating that none of them know him, which tells us something about the Joker. At the end of that scene, we realize that the Joker was among them, which tells us again something about the Joker. We establish all of that up front. In the very first scene of the movie, And what it does is on the back end tell us everything we need to know about that character moving forward. We know going forward from that this character is going to be very slippery. So we have here, between the prologue and the first notebook, this image of a character who is ever changing. So we know moving forward, this character is on some type of downward slope. When will it hit? How hard will it hit? All of these things are questions that are now built up in the reader. As a writer, that is extremely powerful. Intrigue from your audience is extremely powerful. When an audience member, when a reader wants to turn the page, wants to see what else there is about this character, you have succeeded. It was the last quest for love I was to direct at human beings. Although I had a mortal dread of human beings, I seemed quite unable to renounce their society. I managed to maintain on the surface a smile which never deserted my lips. This was the accommodation I offered to others, a most precarious achievement performed by me only at the cost of excruciating efforts within. So I think what it is important to do here, it's always important to apply literature to life. Otherwise, we are ourselves just being space cadets. There is a necessary part of literature which involves translating the text into our own lives and learning from the text as a text, so that we don't have to learn from mistakes on our own, so that we don't have to make mistakes and fumble about life in ways that we have already learned from other people. It is one of the things that makes us most human, being able to take a story and translate it into our life and learn the lesson therefrom. And it's fairly obvious at this point in the story already where it is that we're going. There is some trauma in Yozo's life, and he is struck from it, and going forward, he is filtering all of life through this assumption. So we have to ask ourselves the question in order to interpret this text into our own life: are people worth it? No. No, people are not worth it. But here's the thing: someone will be. That is the great truth in life. Someone out there is worth our effort. And if we don't learn from stories like this, if we don't learn from stories about people giving up, then a little bit of our humanity is lost in the process. So, this idea of learning from the text, applying the text in our own life, this is not something just to do with text books. That is the great fallacy of reading. A lot of people don't understand that what we're doing when we're reading fiction, falsehoods, is bringing them into our own life and learning from them. So, one of the things we can learn here is this idea that I'm special and I'm not human, and people aren't really there for me. I don't understand them, is in itself a fallacy. This idea that you're the special one, what are the odds that that's true? Odds are you're not special. Odds are, in fact, you're probably a little substandard. And that's okay. You're supposed to be. What would life be if we were all born at or slightly above average? Now, I know definitionally we can't all be above average, but you understand what I'm saying. If we were all born pretty good at sports, if we were all born pretty good at reading, if we were all born pretty tall, if we were all born pretty, all of these things, there would be no struggle to life. And it is our struggles in life that let us grow closer to one another. So, what is it that we struggle with? And do we want a partner that struggles with the same things? Or do we want a partner that has different strengths to balance these things out? And it doesn't just need to be an intimate relationship. These people at work, these people we work with, do we want people who are good at the same things that we are good at? Our friends, do we want to hang out with people that are good at the same things that we're good at? Or do we want other questions answered by other people? This is a question that we probably ought to look to this text in order to help us answer. I also have the impression that many women have been able, instinctively, to sniff out this loneliness of mine, which I confided to no one. And this, in later years, was to become one of the causes of my being taken advantage of in so many ways. Women found in me a man who could keep a love secret.